It being 6 o'clock, I call the April 2022 Town of Clayton Planning Board meeting to order. For roll call, all board members are present except for Board Member Lee. A reminder, all members of the public to speak as clearly and loudly as possible into the microphone. I will try to remind you as we go along if it becomes hard to hear, and hopefully I don't offend you if I ask you to speak a little louder. Item number 2 on our agenda is are there any adjustments to the agenda needed? Okay. If there are none, we'll move on to item 3, approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the February minutes needed? If there are none, for March. That's March. If there are no corrections to the February minutes, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Motion for approval.
Motion made by Board Member Powers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Liscombe. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The next item on the agenda is the 2021 132-RZ Grace Reformed Church Rezoning. Are there any board members that would like to recuse themselves?
Yes, sir. I have a relationship with a church and sold them property and have been working with them on this rezoning, so I need to recuse myself.
Thank you. Board Member Liscombe recuses from this rezoning. We're now hear from staff.
All right. Thank you, Board Member Moore. Members of the board, members of the public. Apologies. Let's try that again. Test. Okay, I think we're good. My name is Aaron. Test. I'll speak very softly. My name is Aaron Pritchard. I am planner to the town planning department. Here to present an application for a rezone of the Grace Reformed Church property located at the entrance to the Dogwood Forest neighborhood. I'm going to keep going because I think hopefully we're okay. The request is to rezone 3 parcels together, which...
Speak up a little bit so we can hear him at the back.
Oh. Okay. I'm afraid if I speak too loudly, we'll get some feedback. Okay, can you hear me? No. No? Okay. I'm here tonight to present a rezoning petition for the Grace Reformed Church property, which is altogether approximately 11.5 acres. The request is to rezone the property from the residential estate zoning district RE to office institutional OI. The existing use of the site is residential, and the location of it is along Highway 70 Business near the entrance to the Dogwood Forest neighborhood. As you can see on the screen, the current zoning of the property is RE, and if approved, the rezone would make the property OI on the bottom map, as you can see there. One of the criteria for an approval of a rezone is that the planning board tie their decision to a consistency statement as to how the rezone is consistent with the town's growth plan. So because of that, I've included the above screenshot here. One of the goals in our growth plan is that any new development proposals will be reviewed for consistency with the future land use map. So I've included a screenshot of the future land use map here. As you can see, the site is designated as a community center. And community centers are, the plan calls for offices, institutional uses, commercial uses, things of that nature. So rezoning to the OI zoning district would be consistent with that. A couple of other factors to consider though. First, access. This is an aerial photo that I gathered. It's not in your packet, board, but I gathered it today from the website Nearmap. It shows the site outlined in blue there with US Highway 70 Business in yellow, and then adjacent roadways, so you have Fernwood Drive there. That star, as you can see on the map, is a stubbed driveway, internal driveway, which is behind the Pep Boys, which is just east of the property. It's unlikely that access to US Highway 70 Business would be approved because there is an existing intersection at Fernwood Drive, and NCDOT does not generally take kindly to having too many driveways in too close proximity. Another factor to consider is utilities. So this is a screenshot from the town's utilities map. As you can see, the blue line there is an 8-inch Johnson County water main, which runs underneath Fernwood Drive. And then east of the property, you have a 10-inch Town of Clayton maintained sewer gravity main. A couple of things to consider. So should you grant to approve this rezone, any permitted use within the OI zoning district would be allowed at the site, because this is a conventional rezone. The planning board should consider all potential uses of the site when considering whether or not to rezone the property. After the planning board's action, the rezoning application will proceed to the town council for the final vote. So the planning board shall make a recommendation to approve, deny, table tonight to staff. And that is the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Thank you. We'll now hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Planning Board, and members of the public. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I will try to speak up. So my name is Emily Bedingfield. I'm speaking as the applicant on behalf of Grace Reformed Church. And I do want to point out that Pastor Ken Kunkel is in the audience this evening. He hasn't prepared anything to state, but if there are questions that would be specific to the church as the property owner from the board, he would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I wanted to briefly go through the 7 criteria that are required as part of 155-704J. Of course, those were included in the packet as part of our application. They were also included as part of the staff report and also included staff's commentary on each of those. But I just wanted to briefly touch on each one verbally, just for the record this evening and for the benefit of anybody who may be in the audience or yourselves who might not have had a chance to spend a whole lot of time looking at them, and really just highlight a few main points here. So I'm going to start with criteria number 1, which is consistency with adopted plans and policies of the town. Now, as staff pointed out, what we look to for this criteria is the 2045 growth plan. This is a recently adopted, well-vetted plan that was created with extensive public input. It was reviewed by the planning board, the council, and ultimately adopted. And I point out that it's recently adopted because this is not an out-of-date plan. This is something that was put together with sort of today's Clayton in mind, right? And as we saw on the future land use map, this property is designated as community center in that future land use map. And the office and institutional zoning district, in my opinion, and based on the determination by town's planning staff, is consistent with that community center designation on the future land use map. I also want to point out that it is my belief that in that growth plan, it was very intentional on these specific properties. If you go back and look at the growth plan that was in place prior to our current 2045 growth plan, you'll see that only a portion of these 3 properties are designated as future non-residential. The 2045 growth plan actually expanded the non-residential designation to include all 3 of these properties, which to me shows that there was actual consideration taken. It wasn't just a broad swath. Somebody sat down and looked at that and made a determination that for our future land use map, all 3 of those properties should be designated as non-residential. So I would say it's, we concur with staff that it is consistent with our adopted plans in the form of the 2045 growth plan. Criteria 2, and actually criteria 4 are a little bit related. They both speak to sort of suitability of the site for the proposed zoning district. Generally speaking, when we're looking at location here, office and institutional is defined as generally located along or proximate to major roadways or adjacent to commercial uses and may act as a buffer between such areas and residential uses. That language is directly from our Unified Development Code. Now, this property, these 3 properties check both those boxes. It is both adjacent to a major roadway, and it is sitting nestled between commercial uses in the form of Shotwell Station, which is a higher intensity highway business type use, and the low density dogwood forest. So that is the reason that, one reason O&I has been requested for this property and is consistent for this specific location. More specifically to the property, there was some question, as you heard in the staff report and saw in the staff presentation, about the suitability of existing infrastructure. Now, I do want to speak to that, because anytime we consider a rezoning, I would say we, of course, want to look at existing infrastructure. We would never want to approve, say, highway business zoning in a location that will never have sewer and will never have adequate road access. But I want to point out that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about limited infrastructure. In fact, the staff report states that as far as access is concerned, this site is inadequate for any type of high-intensity use. We agree. We don't think this site is appropriate for high-intensity use. This site has been reviewed and due diligence completed for low-intensity non-residential uses. Anytime that we, in the town, and you guys are reviewing a rezoning, of course, we need to be looking at every possible use within that zoning district. We're looking at every possible use within office and institutional, but that doesn't mean that every possible use could logistically locate on this site. This site is going to be naturally limited by existing infrastructure. It's naturally limited by the access that's there today. We've done due diligence, and I know staff pointed out that water and sewer is not directly adjacent or directly on the site, but our research has shown that there are connections available either on 70 or to the Shotwell Station site. So development of the site to a low density or low intensity non-residential use that would be consistent with the office and institutional zoning district and consistent with the future land use map is absolutely a reality for this property. I would also say that as far as potential uses on this site go, that is sort of speaks to some of the concerns that we've heard from neighbors, which are concerns over high intensity uses on this property. High intensity uses, unless major improvements are made to the roadway systems and access, are simply not going to happen on this site. Now, we spoke with North Carolina Department of Transportation, and we spoke with a traffic consultant, both of whom concurred that a smaller sized church, like the one we were looking at, and again, a small church is just an example of a low intensity non-residential use that could come on this property if rezoned to office and institutional. But that low intensity use would not have impacts to the roadway system that would, by any stretch, require any sort of improvements. NCDOT owns Fernwood Drive, and of course they own US 70 right-of-ways, and they told us in writing that they would not have any problem with a use of that intensity locating there, nor would they require any sort of improvements. Again, we spoke with a traffic consultant who ran the numbers, looked at traffic counts, and said the same thing. And I didn't want to include those documents because I know we're not talking about a church, but I did want you all to know, and I wanted the members of the neighborhood that are here tonight to know that that level of due diligence was done for a low intensity, non-residential use. I'll keep saying it, but just as an example of something that could come in as office and institutional, because I do want to make it clear that infrastructure is there to support non-residential, but it is not there to support a very high-intensity non-residential use, which I agree would have big impacts on surrounding properties. So I won't speak to all of the criteria because, again, they are in your staff report. They are in there, but I really wanted to highlight those few points from criteria 1, 2, and 4. I'd be happy to speak to the other criteria if you guys would like me to. Just say the word. I also wanted to speak to a question which is not part of the criteria, but it may be a question that's on your minds, and I know it's a question that we heard from the residents at our neighborhood meeting, and I know it was a question presented in a letter that was included in your packet that staff provided you, and that is, why did the church pursue a rezoning and not a special use permit? And, Ken, feel free to correct me if I say anything wrong, but I did want to take a moment to address that. The church's goal from day one has been to purchase property with the assurance that they can build a church on that property one day. They're not ready to build. They're not even ready to fully design the property right now. So they wanted to purchase property that they can hold on to and raise funds and take those next steps required to design the site. They don't want a property with no guarantee that the church can go there one day. That's just not a good use of their funds. A special use permit request is an option. It was something we very strongly considered. However, the burden of a special use permit was too much for this particular situation, and I'll explain why. Before coming to the town council, a special use permit has to have staff level approval of a site plan. Site plans in Clayton just require a lot of detail. There are lighting plans, there are grading plans, there are engineering plan sheets, there's stormwater design, erosion control, landscaping plans. All of this is work completed by engineers, landscape architects, and planners. You also have to submit architectural elevations, so you have an architect on board. My point is, with special use permits, before anybody tells you whether they think your idea is a good idea, you have to design every square inch of your site. You have to design your building before you even know if council thinks it's a good idea to put a church on that property. I'm not here to debate the merits of special use permits in the town of Clayton, but I did want to explain that that burden is a lot, and it is a lot of money. It is tens and tens of thousands of dollars, if not well beyond that, in order to have that work done. And the church's interest was in being good stewards of the money that has been donated by their members. And they didn't want to take a risk. When you design a site, you do all the engineering for that site, you don't get to just transfer it to the next site if that doesn't work out. You have to start over. Maybe your building elevations you can keep, but the rest of it, you are starting over when you go to a new location. And so I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that it wasn't a flippant decision to request a rezoning versus going for a special use permit. It was something that was very carefully considered, and that level of risk was just not something that the church was wanting to do at this time with donated money. So I just wanted to make that clear. I know it's not addressing the merits of the rezoning itself, but it is, I just wanted to make sure we're kind of honoring some of those questions that we heard from the residents in a public setting, so that was very clear. So in sum, we definitely believe that, of course, the rezoning is consistent with our future land use map. I do believe that the designation as non-residential was something that was thought out for this particular location along Highway 70. And again, it doesn't mean that we're saying that a hotel or a school or something is going to be appropriate here. It's not in its current configuration. All we can tell you is that the due diligence has been done for a very low-intensity non-residential use, and we believe that that low-intensity use that would be naturally accompanying this rezoning is appropriate and would be an excellent buffer between a very busy highway corridor and a low-density residential neighborhood.
Excuse me, sir. Please, no more comments such as that. Thank you, ma'am. You may.
And I would like to add that we did hold a...
Hold on, stop.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is getting out of hand. We got people expressing digits of the middle finger. This is not appropriate. It is not respectful. Please conduct ourselves in an orderly manner. You may proceed.
I just wanted to add that we did have a neighborhood meeting, excuse me. And I thought the meeting went very well. I enjoy having neighborhood meetings because I enjoy collecting feedback, and I'm not just saying that. I enjoy collecting feedback from our residents. And while a rezoning, you don't get to change what you're asking for, I hope that we spent 2 hours in that meeting talking and providing as much information as we possibly could. And I just wanted to say that I was grateful to the residents that were on that meeting because I thought it was a very civil and very good discussion. And I was very appreciative of the level of respect that we received from the residents in the neighborhood during that neighborhood meeting. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have, as is the pastor of the church.
Thank you. Hold on a minute. Does any board member have any questions of the applicant? Yes, Board Member Dupree.
If the staff says that there's no access, that the state's not likely to give access on the 70, what is it may be on the things, but where is the access going to be for this?
I'm sorry, I should have spoken to that. Oh, sorry. I should have spoken to that. The access is off of Fernwood Drive. And that is the situation that we discussed. That is the situation that we discussed with NCDOT. Sorry.
So you would pull into the entrance to Dogwood
Correct.
and then go in?
And then there would be a new commercial driveway. Exactly.
Board Member Bagley.
Just a quick question on that. Is that a hard stop? Like, there's no way it's ever coming off of 70? Do we have a hard no on that?
I wouldn't say we have a hard no. For the level of intensity that we were looking at in our due diligence for that, smaller church, it simply wasn't needed. We weren't looking at anything that would cause, according to, again, we were talking with our traffic engineer and talking with DOT, and they felt that the impacts would be so slight that it wouldn't warrant anything else. I would say any use that comes in could absolutely look at that option and have that conversation with DOT. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Powers.
It was mentioned earlier about the stub behind Pep Boys. Did anybody look into extending that to have the access to this lot being that way? The thing I'm thinking of with that.
The council speaking, the questions are asked, we can't hear back.
Hello? Is that better? Sorry. Okay. What I'm asking about is the street stub behind Pep Boys, and if that could be extended to this piece of property. And my reason for that is I know that the exit from Fernwood onto 70 at times, it has got to be slow getting out of, and it would be a short way from the exit from the property to 70 on Fernwood. If the exit was down that stub road past Pep Boys and then over to 70, if there was traffic in the area, that would at least give more of a space for the traffic, for the cars from the property to wait to get out rather than backing up on that one small stretch of Fernwood.
We did look at that. So the Shotwell Station development, which is the Pep Boys development there, the stub does not, and the easement does not go all the way to the property line. Yeah. Now, the reason for that, back when that property was approved, that site plan was approved, was because of the high cost associated with crossing floodplains, wetlands, and a stream. It's doable, but at that time, with that current planning staff and council, it wasn't doable enough to require the stub to go all the way to the property line. It was just seen as sort of an infeasible connection. I would say, shooting in the dark, maybe if something came in that was high intensity enough, could warrant the cost of making that connection. That's certainly a possibility if that agreement could be made with the property owners of that development. Because again, the easement for access and public access does not extend to the property line. It essentially stops where that stub sort of stops. Now, there is another stub in the Dogwood Forest neighborhood that dead ends into what is colloquially called the Hefner property, because that's who owns it. That property that it's connected to is currently undeveloped, but it is a large chunk of property that sits on 70, and I think it would be safe to say that probably in the future, at some point in time, that property will be developed, and at that point, the town's ordinance requirements to connect to existing stub streets would come into play, and that second entrance to Dogwood Forest would be made.
The only thing I was referring to on that would be if something is built in the next year or 3 years or something like that on this property, I doubt that the Hefner land, unless you know something, that I don't know. I mean, it's been there for a while. It hasn't been developed at all. It would have to be developed, and those developments would have to have the road going up to 70. In the interim there, what I'm thinking of is the residents at Dogwood. If this were a hindrance, just having that one exit and one entrance, which is not clear to get through at some times, that might be a point to be made. That's all I was.
Yeah, and as far as access, like I say, I can only point to the expertise of town staff and our Unified Development Code, which requires a traffic impact analysis at a certain threshold. And if the rezoning is passed, whatever comes through will be evaluated to determine whether it trips the threshold for a traffic impact analysis. And if it does, that will be a required component of the site plan application. So all of those items would be reviewed at that time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now call for public comment. As members of the public come to the podium, please sign in. The town of Clayton has initiated rules for public comments, and we're going to limit them to 3 minutes tonight. So when you please sign in and come to the podium, I have a timer, start a timer just to let you know. And if you're representing a group of contentious, one person, the ordinance spans that to 5 minutes. But if you're representing a group, but you can't come represent a group and yourself, try to get 8 minutes. So let's not play games tonight, okay? All righty. So the first person, please come sign in. Thank you.
I'm not nearly as tall as Ms. Bedingfield or staff, so I will lower this. 5 minutes is a short period of time, so I'm going to get started quickly and pass out some.
Excuse me, are you representing the group?
Yes, so.
Okay.
I represent certain members of the Dogwood subdivision community. There are 5 to 6 speakers that I'm aware of that will also be speaking on their own behalf, but I represent the community as a whole as well. So if the board would allow me to, I would take the 5 minutes that's allowed for the group. Then, of course, individual members would be able to represent themselves in that 3-minute time frame. If that's acceptable to the board.
Yes, ma'am.
Say it again. That would be lovely. Thank you very much.
And she stated her name.
All right, so while Mr. Howell has very kindly agreed to pass out.
Ma'am, could you state your name to the board?
Yes, sir, I'm getting to that. My name is Whitney Hosey. I'm an attorney with the law offices of Naren Wenzel, here on behalf of several members of the Dogwood subdivision, which is located adjacent to the property in question. The homeowners have asked that I come to speak tonight against the rezoning for several reasons. We're talking about a community that is roughly contains about 76 to 78 lots, most of whom have now signed a petition, which is being passed out as part of a blue folder that I believe is being handed to the chairman. For the purposes of showing to the board here that we are opposed vehemently to the rezoning for several reasons. The next thing that Ben is passing out to you is a short pack of information to which you may need to make reference during the discussion this evening and during your deliberations. Within the packet, you'll find a copy of relevant portions of the Town of Clayton's UDC, a map of the property, and copies of additional letters of tonight's presenters, which we requested be entered into the record for the meeting. To begin, I'd like to point your attention to a portion of the UDC of which I'm sure you're familiar. It's section 155-102B, which specifically reads about zoning regulations that they're supposed to be in accordance with a comprehensive plan and are designed to lessen congestion in the streets, secure safety from fire, panic, and other dangers, to promote health and general welfare, to provide adequate light and air, so on and so forth. And the reason why I point to this section specifically is because further on down, you'll see the regulations have been made with reasonable consideration, among other things, as to the character of the jurisdiction in the areas and their particular sustained suitability for particular uses. The next area of the UDC that I'll point to is sections 155-200B2B, which is the residential estate definition. Residential estate districts are comprised of low-density, single-family dwellings, and other selected uses which are compatible with the open and rural character of the area. Now, as Aaron presented earlier, no doubt this area is no longer rural in any capacity, and we want to make sure that the board understands that we understand that as well. Clayton is growing. We appreciate the fact that Clayton is growing. But there's been a lot of discussion tonight about the compatibility with future planning, and we're sitting here talking about an area where we're already a little bit off from that, right? You'll see, according to this map, that the issue in orange is supposed to be high-density residential. Well, right now, all of it's business. Literally every single one of that is B3 zoning. So we're already a little bit far away from what we had initially anticipated. And now we're asking to consider a low density residential with what is essentially going to equate as office institutional. And so we just feel that the rezoning at this time, frankly, might just be a little bit premature until such time as we can determine as a town, as a community, what this area is actually going to look like and make sure that it is in fact consistent with the plan. The next thing I'll point to, and just in sum of the UDC, is office institutional. And as the applicant themselves admitted, we're not necessarily just talking about a church this evening. We're talking about a number of different uses, including institutions like the one that we're discussing, associated administrative, executive, and professional research uses in new and existing structure, and even limited retail uses. So the applicant specifically stated that they had done a low impact traffic assessment, but they openly admit that they did not do one for high intensity. And even if you have limited retail, we're still talking about massively increased traffic. So I'm going to skip forward here because I don't have much more time. But one of the things that I'm going to ask the board to think of tonight is a few things. The first is DOT plans a superhighway within the next decade, which means the Fernwood Drive access is going to be a right turn lane only. Eventually, in order to be able to get back toward the Raleigh or Garner area, you're going to have to go down and make a U-turn, which means if there is not access granted for this particular OI residential zone off of 70 directly, you are going to massively impact those that live off of Fernwood Drive. In light of that, staff concern item number 4 on the applicant's responses noted that there's no plans or no proposed plans to develop adjacent lots in order to deal with this access issue. So if Fernwood Drive were to be closed, if, for example, something were to happen, and God forbid on 70, it back it up to where these residents would not be able to access their property, frankly, that's already an issue, and you'll hear from several members of the community tonight where that's the case. The next thing I'll note is emergency issues. That's something that has not come up this evening. It's an issue that we already experience as a part of this community where there's one way in and one way out. If Fernwood Drive is closed, there is no way for fire, EMS, or other ambulatory services to be able to get back to members of the community in order to deal with emergency issues. And in light of the fact that the Hefner property has no plans to develop, at least not that we're aware of, we would request that the council consider the fact that that is the case. The lack of water and sewer has already been addressed by staff, and I won't speak to that, but I just ask that the board continue to consider that. And the final thing that I'll discuss this evening is the fact that you've heard a lot about special use permits, and the church has very graciously and openly admitted that it is cost prohibitive, and I respect that 100%. They're trying to be cognizant of their congregation's money and investment. But that being said, and I promise I'm finishing, the special use permit inevitably means that we are talking prematurely here about this particular issue, and I want to harp on that for just one more minute if you'll allow me.
No, ma'am.
Because,
You're already over your time.
all right, well, I just ask that the board consider the fact that there are alternative avenues. At this time, I'll introduce Mr. Troy DeHaven. He is actually, unfortunately, experiencing severe seasonal allergies. You have a copy of his letter within your packet. He speaks to traffic issues and that sort of thing, but because I can't speak, Troy will now come to speak on behalf of the citizens.
Sir, could you sign in?
Yeah.
Is that me? Is that me?
Hi there, can you hear me okay? Is that okay? My name's Troy DeHaven. I live at 717 Fernwood Drive. I believe a letter I had sent was included in your package, so I don't want to go into that in detail. Do want to tell you I've got 25 years experience in real estate development. I have a master's in planning from the University of Virginia. This is a low-density residential neighborhood, established neighborhood. Been here for 40 years. I understand trying to put higher density along Route 70, but this is a rezoning to O&I. And under O&I, you can have schools, you can have daycare, you can have hospitals, you can have hotels, motels. This rezoning is for O&I. It's not for what, and I respectfully decline. Some of these uses or respectfully disagree with the applicant. Some of these uses are high intensity. If you've seen stacking at daycares or schools at peak hour trips, you'll know those are high intensity uses. The second point that I disagree with the applicant on is there is not sufficient infrastructure. DOT is shutting down that intersection at Fernwood and 70. Excuse me. They're shutting it down because it's not safe. We can no longer, at probably by the end of this year, take a left turn and go west. We have to go east and do a U-turn. Likewise, we can't take a left going west and come into our neighborhood once this goes to a reduced conflict intersection. So it's not sufficient for what's already there, much less some of these uses that would be allowed under O&I zoning. And so I want y'all to please keep that in mind. That is what we're talking about here. Once this gets zoned, if it does get zoned to O&I, any of those uses would be allowed by right and don't have to come back before you. So again, I disagree with this rezoning and hope that you do not recommend it.
Thank you,
Happy
sir.
to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nick Ferez, who is another member of the residents.
Would you sign in, sir?
Good evening, and thank you for hearing us tonight. I also submitted a letter to you, and I'm going to read and paraphrase from my letter how I feel about the zoning. I've been a resident of Clayton for the past 26 years and a resident of Dogwood Forest for the last 3.5 years. As a chiropractor, I chose Clayton for the opportunity and the demographics that it afforded. As a holder of a master's degree in urban and environmental planning, I was drawn to Clayton by its unique design, layout, and charm. As a business person in town, I've enjoyed and benefited from the growth of Clayton. As an environmentalist, I have enjoyed the quality of life Clayton can provide. We're all fortunate to have such a desirable town and county to live and work in. My original office was in downtown Clayton, but for the past 15 years, my office has been on Highway 70, quite near the Dogwood Forest subdivision. As a result, I have front row seats watching the traffic back up from the intersection of 70 and Shotwell Road, right past my office, which is across from the ABC store, sometimes all the way back to Walmart. And it can be bumper to bumper. This used to happen only during rush hour, and now I see it more and more over the course of time. Not only during commuter hours, but also at many intervals during the weekdays, as well as frequently on the weekends. Keep in mind, I'm there 12 hours a day. I'm watching the whole thing happen in real time. Growth is coming to Clayton no matter what we want or what we do. However, growth can be managed. And if managed properly, growth can enrich a community culturally as well as financially. If managed poorly, it can have deleterious effects not only on individual subdivisions or pockets, but to the entire community at large. This includes inappropriate and unnecessary contributions to traffic flow and congestion by improper placement of a high-traffic development. It is for these many reasons I oppose the rezoning of Dogwood Forest subdivision as office and institution. This particular piece of land was rightfully designed as a small residential community, and thus it only has one form of ingress and egress to Highway 70. It is severely limited in its capacity for entry and exit, which gets more difficult each and every day, even at the current level. And with Clayton's growth and adding the inevitable growth of the town and traffic with the DOT plans of limiting access that Troy just discussed, this zoning change spells a recipe for increased and unnecessary traffic.
Sir, could you please wrap it up?
Chaos and delays.
Sir, could you please wrap it up?
I'm sorry?
Your time ran out. Could you please?
Okay, do I have any more time to speak?
No, sir. I'm allowing you to close now.
Well, I will close with this. I enter and exit the subdivision on a daily basis. It can be treacherous. When I'm coming from Garner, or if I'm coming from Smithfield, that little turning lane, if I have somebody behind me going fast, I come in pretty hot. If we add a large development here, it's going to make matters worse. And with the DOT plans, I fear that it will be very dangerous, and at the least, it'll be inconvenient, and at the worst, it can be life-threatening to some people driving.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for listening.
I'd like to have Mr. Jamie Wilburn come up to speak.
How you doing? My name is Jamie Wilburn. I live at 711 Fernwood. I'm one of the houses there that's designated as a community center, directly bordering the property in question. And a lot of discussion has gone on tonight about how traffic is going to be affected by the neighborhood. And I would just like to say briefly that I concur with a lot of my neighbors' concerns about this. I don't want to speak on that too much. What I wanted to speak on is how having an impact on my neighborhood, or my house specifically, would happen if this was changed from a residential to an O&I. When we bought our house, the thing that sold us on it was the view. We have an open floor plan. You walk in, you look out, and you see nothing but trees. It's beautiful to look at, but it also serves an important function as that is a buffer from the highway noise, from Highway 70, from the businesses at the corner of Shotwell. And one of the things that I think that is overlooked from this, as you hear people talk tonight, is the scale of this area. I'm not Tom Brady, but I could stand on my back porch and throw a rock at the buildings on this property. It's that close. So when you talk about coming in and putting in anything that's not currently residential, you're talking about clearing all these trees, and you're talking about tearing down the buildings. Now, my family, we have an unorthodox schedule. We go to bed at 4 a.m. and we get up at noon. So anything other than residential there is going to impact our ability potentially to sleep. So the change that we're looking at personally is going from a woodlands area that acts as a buffer for highway noise, and it's just beautiful to look at, to potentially months of construction or more, tearing down the trees, changing the view from our property lines, and I'm just failing to see how you could have any kind of an increase in traffic into this area that is going to be a positive on the people that currently live in this neighborhood versus the residential area that we currently are living in. I would like to be able to continue getting up in the morning, sitting on my couch, drinking coffee and looking out over trees, rather than looking at a business or a church or any other kind of a building. It's just not an improvement from where we are right now. So, I mean, that's where we are. I just wanted to share how this affects us as people, not so much as traffic and buildings and stuff, but it's potentially going to impact our property value, our privacy, potentially our safety, and it's just perceived as a general negative for the residents that live in this area. And so I hope that's taken into consideration. And I'll keep it brief and just stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Ms. Cynthia Powell will be speaking to you next.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Cynthia Powell. I live at 914 Mulberry Road, and I am a 17-year-plus resident of the Dogwood Forest Estates. My home is adjacent to the parcels in question for rezoning to OI, which I strongly oppose. There are so many reasons I oppose this. Safety, trespassing, and loitering issues in a parking lot that's just left empty at certain times of day. Flooding, which is already an issue in my area of the neighborhood. Emergency services delays, noise issues, traffic congestion, and decrease in property values. While I am opposed to rezoning for all of these reasons, and the reasons you've heard from my neighbors, the two I'll focus on is safety, trespassing, loitering, and flooding. Safety is a concern because it's been my personal experience that parking lots attract persons who do not always have the best intentions. Rezoning to OI opens the door to attract such unsavory elements to our neighborhood, as well as encouraging the trespassing on our neighborhood and our properties and increased possibility of criminal acts and loitering. I personally have already experienced this with the Cleveland Draft House, and that's across the road. I've had to call the police myself. In addition, we are a dead-end street, as you well know. We've had to call the police for people who occasionally will come down and park at the end of Mulberry and try to do illegal things like drugs. We've had to call the police on that as well. Doing this OI rezoning will only increase that issue, in my opinion. Dogwood Forest Estates is a family community with adults and children who love the outdoors and enjoy their properties and neighborhood. Rezoning to OI would affect the safety we currently enjoy in our neighborhood and homes. Flooding. Putting impervious surfaces will increase stormwater runoff and overflow. How is this going to be handled? Flooding is already an issue for the end of my road at Mulberry. I have personally seen the water rise to my driveway, and there are 2 other homes affected by the water before it even hits my home. I'm sure assurances will be made that this will be handled. However, when Walmart was built, the same assurances were made, and it's my understanding that my neighbors actually had to buy flood insurance, something that was never required before because of the flooding, because of the increase of impervious surface. And that's miles away. We're talking about putting impervious surfaces for me in my backyard. I'm not against business or institution. They both play an important role in our growth in our society. However, due to these concerns I've raised, Dogwood Forest Estates should remain residential. This is not an area to foster positive or safe OI growth. Therefore, I oppose rezoning and respectfully request you
Could you close?
do not recommend it. Yes, that was it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Ms. Lisa Rabig.
Hi,
Hello.
my name is Lisa Rabig, and I live on Fernwood Drive. My home is located adjacent to the applicant's property, on the opposite corner of Fernwood Drive and Business 70. I've been a resident of North Carolina for 15 years, and my husband and I purchased this home about 7 years ago. We chose the area for various reasons, and the quiet neighborhood, the many trees and the wildlife in the area, the suburban rural feel of Johnston County because I grew up on a farm, and the close proximity to Johnston Medical Center as I have extensive medical issues. I have several concerns about rezoning the property. I'm very concerned about emergency vehicles not being able to access my home in the event of an emergency. As I've stated, I have extensive medical issues, and I already have this concern with the traffic. The only ingress and egress to the property will be located on Fernwood Drive. I have personally spoken with Sam Lohorn, DOT's district engineer for our area, and he informed me there will be no access on Business 70 for this property. The only access will be located on Fernwood Drive, across from my house, basically. The Fernwood Drive was not designed to handle the increased volume of the vehicles of an office institutional rezoning would bring. I'm also concerned about accessing my own driveway, depending on the traffic because of the proximity to this property. I have concerns with the view from my front porch, my living room, my family room, and my bedrooms. I've spoken with several real estate agents who inform me that rezoning this property will devalue my home. I myself can attest to this fact as I'm a licensed real estate agent in another state, yet my license has been inactive since relocating to North Carolina. Another concern I have is for the parking lot. It would be safety issue, like my neighbor had said, and I'd like to add that there would be lighting from the parking lot that would pretty much give a glow to my house. It would be a concern, especially with my bedrooms, and additional noise from a parking lot would make me not even want to open my windows. I actually have a few pictures to show you the view from my living room across Fernwood Drive to this property that's the applicant is looking to rezone. This, two pictures. This is what I see from the steps of my front porch. This is not exactly a thing that should be in this area. It's kind of meant for residential, more so than office institutional. Even though it has the highway access, I can understand it. But the way the whole development was designed with the access to be on Fernwood, it would be a huge safety concern for all of us.
Thank you.
Mr. Bill Brewer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Brewer. I'm a 45-year resident of Clayton. The last 30 of those years have been spent in the Dogwood Forest area, and I'm also a former town administrator for the town of Clayton, prior to you going to the city management as you are today. I've seen Clayton grow from a sleepy 4,000-plus town community to the community it is today. This growth has been accomplished with a lot of thought safety being a very important part of that plan. Based on the current issues with egress and ingress into and out of Dogwood Forest, I feel safety has not been given the proper due diligence it should receive. Traffic issues have greatly increased over the past few years to the point of egress and ingress into Dogwood Forest subdivision has become a challenge. By you changing this ordinance to O&I, even though the applicant said it has low density, O&I does not have a low density definition within O&I. You are only adding to that challenge of getting into and out of. If established as a church, as is indicated in the rezoning request and applied by the owner, is a reason for the rezoning request. That can be accomplished with a special use permit under the current zoning. Horne Memorial Methodist Church, of which I'm the chairman of the board, just went through that exercise with this board. We were told that we did not need to have it rezoned, and it would better fit the town of Clayton if we remained in O&I and used a special use permit. We had to go through all the expenses that was mentioned earlier just to build the building that we have recently built and to design the plans that we have for looking at in our future growth. So there's no need for a rezoning request. It can be, if the church is the real reason, it can be built under the present zoning. In closing, the special use permit to O&I zoning will not solve the traffic problem. It's only going to take some due diligence and some understanding and some working with the state. For that reason, I am very opposed to any rezoning request.
Thank you, sir.
If the board will humor me for one moment, I'm going to steal Mr. Brewer's last 1 minute and just ask that everyone, in light of the fact that we're not going to have everybody in the neighborhood speak, I promise. But for those of you who are present in the audience, if you would please stand up if you are a member of this community in opposition to this zoning, in light of the fact that you may not have the opportunity to speak this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would just like to speak?
My name is Cherie Bolt. Ooh, maybe I don't need that. My name's Cherie Bolt. I retired this past August from the District Attorney's Office in Placer County, California. I moved to North Carolina for the culture and the diversity, the greenery of your beautiful state. I chose Clayton because of its culture, the small town feel, the friendliness of the people. And in spite of turning into Fernwood Drive and realizing how horrible turning in and out of that neighborhood was going to be, I chose to buy the house at 709 Fernwood Drive. My home is the only one on that map that would be affected on two sides of the rezoning. And I have nothing against a church. I have no guarantee that that's what's going to end up there once it's rezoned. I'm against the zoning because it will change the culture of that beautiful neighborhood. If you haven't been there before, please take the time before you decide to turn down and drive down Fernwood Drive and just see how beautiful and peaceful it is there and how much rezoning would change that culture and that beauty. I have 2 doe that come and feed in my front yard every evening. I did not have that in California, and I don't want to lose that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Any other member of the public would like to speak? Thank you. I'll turn it over to the board for their consideration. Are there any comments from the board?
It seems to me that a lot of the issues, what was that?
I was letting them know, Board Member Bennett.
My apologies. It seems to me that a lot of the issues here with this neighborhood exist with or without anything being built there, as in especially the traffic issues. And realistically, that's not something the town has any jurisdiction over because these are state roads. That's not something that's in our purview as the board here. It's also not something that's in the town's purview. Really, the issue here is with the state. The state controls those roads. The state controls the traffic there. End of story. We don't have any control over that. And so that was just my 2 cents there.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? Yes, Board Member Powers.
Yes, concerning those last statements, the way the roads and the traffic are not optimal right now is a point. But from my perspective, adding, as has been said by the speakers, what could be a hotel, a church, a number of other things to that piece of land which is attached to the road coming in there is only going to be more of a problem. And regardless of what, right now, if somebody was to make lots out of this area and build half a dozen houses, that would increase the traffic, but it would not do as much as a hotel or a hospital or a church would do there. And so that's my perspective on that. It seems like it was laid out however many years ago, and right now if you increase the amount of traffic going out and coming in off of Highway 70, it's going to have a significant effect on that whole area. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Yes, sir. Board Member DeFree.
Seems to me the concern, and my biggest concern in hearing this, is not that a church would be built there, because I do think a church is low impact. But I also understand the problems with a special use permit and all the expense that goes into that. But I think the concern for me is, as you say, it's a church right now. But that doesn't mean just because you buy property that's what gets built there 2 years from now or 3 years from now. So the O&I is a bit of a concern to me because of what else could end up going there that we would not get any input on later because we've already rezoned it. That to me is a problem.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to either recommend or not recommend 2021-132-RZ Grace Reformed Church rezoning.
Yes, sir. I move that the board not recommend the rezoning.
We have a motion by Board Member Powers. Is there a second?
I second.
We have a second by Board Member Williams. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Board Member Powers' motion passes. Not recommend. Thank you. Next item on the agenda. Okay. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the next item on the agenda is 2021-153-CZM Griffos West Campus Conditional Zoning with Master Plan. We'll now hear from staff.
All right. Good evening, members of the board, members of the public. Hopefully the microphone treats me a little better this time. My name is Aaron Pritchard, once again, Planner 2 for the town. Okay, good. Just here presenting another application for rezone. Tonight it's a conditional zoning district along with a master plan for the Griffles West Campus development. The specific request is to rezone the property from its existing conventional I-2 heavy industrial district to a conditional zoning industrial district. It's a very, very large property, 373 acres. A couple quick project details. At this time, Griffles and McGill, their engineer, are only planning for phases 1 and 2. Phases 1 and 2 will be approximately 360,000 square feet of gross floor area for the buildings. Altogether, because a maximum floor area kind of needed to be selected, Griffles settled on 10 million square feet of gross floor area for the entire West Campus. Though keep in mind, it's worth pointing out that that is subject to impervious surface and lot coverage maximums. As well, there's a 100-foot wide development buffer that they're proposing along the northeast perimeter. So if you look at that aerial map there, the single-family residential lots to the northeast are where you will find that development buffer. In terms of location, it fronts along the North Carolina Railroad right-of-way. It's next to their existing North Campus, which takes access off of Cutter Lab Access Road. So the applicant is just proposing to construct a two-way driveway off of that road into the site. I've done enough talking on the first slide. This is a screenshot of the master plan which they submitted to us. As you can see there, most of this site is conceptual, kind of held in its existing state, whereas down near the southern part of it are phases 1 and 2. That's what the current plans are for. The 100-foot development buffer, if you look on your screen there, is that orange bit up there at the top right. A little bit more, the proposed use is production and warehousing, kind of more of what Griffles is already doing. I already talked about access and intensity. Water, sewer utilities will be provided by the town of Clayton. The electric provider at the site would be Duke Energy. The dimensional standards, that's a screenshot taken directly from the applicant's master plan narrative document. Those dimensional standards, I should point out, they do not differ in any way except for the maximum floor area and the maximum building height from the current zoning district of I-2. So everything else, the setbacks, the building coverage percentage, impervious surface percentage, that's all remaining the same. The current maximum building height is 50 feet, but Griffles is a bit of a unique case, and so they needed taller buildings. Let's see here. So the project will comply with the town's stormwater ordinance for total nitrogen export and impervious surface percentage. Griffles has an overall campus stormwater master plan, which they submitted to our engineering department back in October 2021, which was accepted. We've handled a fair number of site plans for Griffles on their existing site for new buildings and things like that. And so Susan Locklear, our stormwater engineer, regularly updates that master plan document whenever new projects come in. So this project would comply with that master plan. In terms of water, there's an available 20-inch line. The town has already updated its models for provision of water for phases 1 and 2. Sanitary sewer, it's to be treated on site. They have their own treatment plant prior to discharging to the town's collection system. I should point out the engineering department here is still finalizing the wastewater allocation, and the hope is to have that done as soon as possible with this eventually proceeding to council. Just really quickly, again, on the development buffer, some of the allowed uses would be low-impact recreational trails, stormwater outfalls, and utilities, as well as scientific and natural restoration, wetland restoration. There's an existing 50-foot riparian buffer that would be within that 100-foot landscape buffer, which would be protected already. So no disturbance would be allowed, and that's already existing. All other landscaping, so interior site landscaping and vehicle use area, so that's for parking lots, all of those standards would adhere to what the UDC currently requires. The same is true for parking signage and architecture, so the UDC requirements for the I-2 zoning district would preside. So there are a few criteria for conditional zoning district approvals. The first is consistency with adopted plans and policies. It's pretty straightforward. The growth plan calls for employment centers here. This is consistent with that land use designation. Suitability of subject property. The current zoning permits a variety of light and heavy industrial uses. It's worth pointing out as well that the applicant is not making any changes, proposed changes to the allowed uses at the site. So the allowed uses that currently exist there would remain the same if approved. So the current site is undeveloped, if you didn't gather that from the aerial photo. Capacity for adequate public facilities. So for schools, no impact. It's not residential. In terms of roads, one thing I should clarify, and I apologize for this. Your staff report, I think, noted improvements to 70 business. The TIA actually recommended that for phases 1 and 2, only the two-way driveway would be recommended into this site, and that no changes to 70 business or the Cutter Lab access road would be needed or required at this stage. I already commented on wastewater, water supply, and stormwater. Town finds that legal purposes of zoning are not contravened here. In terms of effect on adjoining property owners, as I mentioned, there's a 100-foot development buffer, which is being proposed adjacent to the residential areas. To the north and west, it is the adjacent parcels are also I-2 already, and largely undeveloped and wooded. So there would be no disturbance to any neighbors to the west. In the event that a natural disaster or act of God occurs, the applicant has agreed to restore any vegetation that would be lost in that buffer. And as I mentioned, the buffer's uses would be restricted, and those uses are clearly delineated in their master plan narrative. The town finds that with the imposed conditions, and if built to the standards of the narrative, there's no detriment to the general public. These 10 criteria here are listed in our UDC, but I figured I would just list them here as well. These are the approval criteria for master plans in the town. A couple considerations. So, of course, the planning board shall make a recommendation. If the proposed application or petition is approved, the district master plan and narrative would all be recorded with Johnston County, and all of those would run with the land and do not expire. So should a new landowner come in, this would continue to preside for the site. The board may recommend any conditions to be revised, added, or removed. I should also point out that I included the signed conditions that the applicant signed as part of your packets, so you'll find that there. And I've also listed them here. So there are 10 conditions in all. The first 2 or 3, I think, are pretty boilerplate in terms of, having the development conform with the master plan and the narrative. Number 4 speaks to a second point of access. As I mentioned now, the applicant is only proposing to construct phases 1 and 2, and the planning department feels that only one access point is sufficient for phases 1 and 2. However, should any further phases come in, we ask that there be a condition that a second point of access be constructed. There's already been some consideration to where that would be, and it would be on the west side of the site. Number 5 just lists out the dimensional standards, as I mentioned. 6 just notes that allowable land uses shall be restricted to the permitted uses in I-1 and I-2. As I mentioned, no change of uses are proposed. Number 7 speaks to the development buffer and its maintenance. As I mentioned, the development buffer will preserve existing vegetation. However, if a natural disaster or some kind of act of God ever occurs where that buffer is cleared away, the applicant has stated that they will try to restore that. Number 8 states that no additional development beyond phases 1 and 2 shall be approved before additional wastewater allocation is approved by the town. And any future development would require a TIA. And that number 10 is just that in the event of any conflict, these conditions shall control. So these 10 conditions. Having said that, staff's recommendation is to approve the proposed petition for a conditional zoning district. There is a requirement from our UDC that if an approval is made by the board, it shall be in writing and it shall include a consistency statement. I apologize, I did not include a separate consistency statement in your packet. However, I did list a statement here on this last slide. So, when you're making your motion, if you'd like to, you can refer back to this slide and then we will include that as an attachment to your motion. So with that, I will, that's the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? If not, thank you. If not, we'll hear from the applicant.
Hi, my name is Ben Cathy with McGill Associates, and I am representing Griffles, and we have done the planning and development thus far. And Mr. Pritchard, I think, covered most aspects of that. The biggest things, it's a very minor change. It would be the building height change, and the rest of that would be following the UDO currently. And Griffles is a very responsible company that wants to do things properly, and they've shown that through this process, and I don't expect anything different going forward from them. So, and I think the presentation covered any aspects, unless you guys have any questions that I could answer.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? Thank you, sir. We'll call for public comment. Are there any public comments on this matter?
Not really much public comment. Do I need to sign in like other people did? Obviously, I live on Rolling Meadows, Griffles. I mean, y'all done great things in this neighborhood.
State your name first, sir.
It's Nathan Braswell.
Okay.
Y'all done great things in this neighborhood, in my opinion. Just so like I said, I live on Rolling Meadows. Obviously, 373 acres is pretty big. A lot of forest area back there, ponds, wildlife. Most thing that I'm concerned of is 100 feet from possibly my property line, which I don't think is going to come that far, because I would think mainly that y'all are going to focus on 70 highway, but then it's coming like Mine is right back there right at the edge of the woods. So I was just trying to see if maybe the 100 feet could go to 1,000 feet or something like that, because, I mean, there's plenty of woods back there, and I would think that y'all are mostly going to focus on 70 Highway, because y'all are a large company, and you're not going to want residential stuff really focusing up towards your stuff. So that's the only thing I was really concerned about, but like I said, Griffles is good for the area, in my opinion, too.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments from the public? Ma'am, you have to come. State your name, please.
Rosemary Fellini. I guess I just have a general question about the riparian buffer. That backs up to right in our backyard. And the way they build our subdivision, I live in the Chandler's Ridge subdivision, by the way. The way they built it, our houses go really far back to the riparian buffer. And as a result of all the building that's been going down there, every day another tree falls down, it's actually a mess back there. We have trees falling all over the place. My concern is that this building is going to be high, and I don't think that buffer is going to be able to take it. It's very thin, very thin. And it gets thinner every day. So I guess my question is about the height of that and that buffer possibly not being there in the very near future. So who would I ask that question to? Well, that was my concern.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question? What precisely are you requesting?
Oh, okay. Actually, it was a question. The question was about the riparian band, the band back there, which is almost non-existent at this point. Like, if that building comes 100 feet to my house, which it's going to be extreme. I'm going to be looking at the back of a building. And I just moved from Long Island, New York to Clayton, North Carolina in 2020 to get away from that. I've lived through all the expansion problems that exist. And I was coming here, hopefully that wouldn't happen. But here I am, 2 years into my home ownership, finding out that I'm possibly going to look at the back of a building. And that buffer is very weak because of the building that went on there. It's so thin. I could show you pictures, it's ridiculous. It consists of like 6 trees, So they're calling it a riparian buffer, but it's not. In some areas it is, but where they built all our new homes in Chandler's Ridge, it's not. So I guess what I'm asking is what they would do. Are we going to be looking at the back of the building? Is there going to be something done about that? Because the problem exists right now. It's only going to get worse.
Ma'am.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Do I leave? I don't know.
Address those?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
That's
sir.
fine, and you're not bothering me here. What I want.
Please speak into the microphone, sir. Please speak into the mic.
That is defined as a riparian buffer. That is an environmental term. Okay. That's 50 feet from the center of that stream in both directions that we cannot
Right, and
deal
I'm
with.
8 feet from it.
Right. Well, and that was a prior sin that's you're now dealing with. So, but the 100 feet is what, and part of that Griffles just gave extra that they will not disturb that. And back to yours, there's a couple of pieces there. They don't plan, their phase 1 and phase 2 intends to carry them through over the next decade. It's sometimes in the it would be 2030 something before phase 1 and phase 2 ever got complete. And yes, it's over, I can't remember the exact, but it's several hundred feet from that back property line. It would be many years before it ever got back there. One of the
My house tomorrow?
you should not, no. One of the conditions was if something ever happened, that vegetation on the 100 feet
Because
that,
of the construction we have there already.
right, but that's not.
I'm going to say that it's only going to get worse.
But that would be on that property that Griffles doesn't control. On Griffles' property, they're not going to be allowed to touch that. So if something happens there, that they would actually be required to restore that to some extent. So,
The waterways that comes through there, because literally, it's like 10 feet from my house, that the waterways that goes back there. And my backyard is eroding already. And
Right.
I'm already like taking steps of that erosion. Are you going to be adding wastewater to our community water system?
well, wastewater, no, we never add wastewater to the stream. So it's stormwater, but back to, there's stormwater requirements that are in place that we have to meet every time we develop anything on that property. We have to put stormwater control measures in to make sure that we're not doing that.
Thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate you answering the questions. Thank you. Any other member of the public would like to come to the podium and have any comments? If not,
Is there any way that, I don't know, if me, her, the other people that are concerned about it could just get like that diagram that you showed of like the property and stuff like that, the actual buildings that are going to be popping up there sometime?
all right, thank you. I'll turn it over to the board for their consideration. Are there any comments from the board?
Ma'am, you were concerned about the riparian buffer, and I share your concern because my neighborhood actually is facing consequences from the development in Chandler's Ridge, because we're downstream of y'all, and our backyard is also eroding because of the development that causes your backyard to erode. So I face the same, we face the exact same issue here in my neighborhood. And I just wanted to say that from what I've seen of this, I have full confidence that Griffles will not add to the problem that already exists.
I hope so. I don't, like I said, I moved here because I lived on farmland. We moved on around in 1969. I'm watching the growing pains that are happening in Clayton, and I lived through them already. And I saw what industry did to the most beautiful island around, you know, it's Queens, New York now.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to either recommend or not recommend 2021-153-CZM Griffles West Campus conditional zoning with master plan.
Aaron, can you flip back? Sorry, Aaron, can you flip back to the consistency statement? So.
Yes, sir. Doing that right now.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we approve the proposal with the consistency statement provided by staff being added to the approval, stating the 2045 growth plan calls for the area to be an employment center, encouraging use of in employment centers, including industrial warehouse, office, research and development. Accordingly, the proposed conditional zoning district is consistent with the 2045 growth plan.
We have a motion to recommend from Board Member Liscombe. Is there a second?
I second.
Have a second from Board Member Bennett. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Planning Director's report. We're now here from Planning Director Howell.
Good evening, Board. And I'll keep this short since we've run a little bit longer than usual, but as Board Member Lipscomb requested that we have longer meetings, I have obliged.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I look forward to more in the future.
I just wanted to give the board a couple of updates. One on staffing levels. We are still searching for one staff member for the planning department. We have a land development specialist position out. Formerly, it was a planning technician. We have retitled it and changed the duties around a little bit. That position is open till filled, so if you know of anyone who's interested in it, please send them our way to apply. Also wanted to let you know that as I think we've talked about before, the Unified Development Code update process has finally kicked off. We had our kickoff meeting with our consultant about 3 weeks ago. And as part of that, we needed to form a steering committee, and as in discussing with the town council, it has been decided that, surprise, you are the steering committee, along with a few other members added from the Board of Adjustment. I believe we have 4 members from the Board of Adjustment that'll join you to form the UDC steering committee. Members, Chairman Bizzell, Vice Chairman Antoine, Member Barry, and Member Perricone from the Board of Adjustment will be joining you. So the steering committee meetings will take place during your regularly scheduled planning board meetings, so we're not adding another night meeting for you. The first steering committee meeting will be next month on May, I believe your meeting is May 23rd. At that meeting, the consultant will be here. It'll probably be about an hour or so, hour to an hour and a half of the meeting will be you as a steering committee with the 4 Board of Adjustment members, and our consultant at that time will go over sort of the expectations for the steering committee, go over the project itself and the schedule. We'll go over the stakeholder comments that will have received by that point. We are in the process of setting up stakeholder interviews with some designated stakeholders throughout the community. So our consultant should be able to give you a summary of those comments, and then also provide a time for you as a board or as a steering committee to provide any comments you may have on the UDC, on the Unified Development Code, the project, any places that you see where there may be concerns or issues. Give you a chance up front to provide that. The second steering committee meeting will be in June, at your June meeting, and at that point, that'll actually be the first real meaty meeting that you'll have. We will have a diagnosis report from the consultant at that time, where it'll be a diagnosis of our current Unified Development Code, as well as the code and how it relates to all of our various plans and policies, and providing areas where, there's things that are just outright omitted from our code, as well as places where we can improve our code. So we'll have that report. You should have that report to you as the steering committee probably about a week to 10 days before the meeting, give you a chance to review that report. And then at the meeting, you'll have a chance to discuss the report. The consultant will provide a presentation as well at that meeting on the report. Following that meeting, on the next day, we will have 2 public open houses, which will be the first 2 public open houses for the UDC update project. Those will both be in this room. One will be and that's June 28th is the date for that public open house. The first open house will run from around 11 or 11:30 in the morning to about 12:30 to about 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon. There will be a presentation about midway through that time. And then the second open house will run from about 4:30 in the afternoon till about 7 or 7:30 that night, again with the presentation around the midway point, sometime after about 6 o'clock. Again, allow folks to come in and talk to us about by that point, the diagnosis report will be posted on the project website, and we'll also have information about it at the meeting and be able to get public comment on it. We do have a project name and a project website. The project name is Codify Clayton. And so in the project website, which will be codifyclayton.com, should be posted or up online within the next week or so. And as we hold public hearings and release documents, public meetings and release documents, that website will be kept up to date fairly often. Following the first public open house period on June 28th, we'll have approximately 2-week public comment period where folks can go onto the website, review the diagnosis report, and submit comments to us on that. Your third steering committee meeting right now is scheduled for September, and that again will be another meaty meeting where you will actually be reviewing what we call the annotated outline for the Unified Development Code. That annotated outline will actually be the backbone to the new Unified Development Code. It'll provide you the new structure. It'll have some minimal actual code in there, but it'll primarily be like I said, an outline with some notes throughout explaining what will go where and giving some more information. I do expect that annotated outline to be a couple hundred pages, so be prepared. You'll have some nice summer reading ahead of you come August, September timeframe. And then following your September meeting, at the end of September, there will be another public open house, again, for that annotated outline. Same format as in June with a midday and then an evening. And then the consultant will make the presentation of that annotated outline to town council in early October. Following that, it'll be pretty quiet for a couple months as the consultant begins actually drafting the new code. And then either late this year or early next year, the steering committee will get back together and you'll have about 4 meetings probably in a row or close to in a row where you'll actually be reviewing the code itself. We will bring it to you in chunks so you don't have to review all 400 or 500 pages at once. Instead, we'll just make you read 100 or 200 pages at once. So that's the rough schedule. Again, and then, springtime next year, after you finish your review of those 4 modules, we'll have another public open house period. We'll also then enter into what we call our testing period, where we'll work with some folks from the development community. We have a engineering group as a sub-consultant they'll redesign several current site plans based on the new code, and then we'll take that to the development community and see if we can break it, and then go back and make some changes and bring it back to them. And then we'll ultimately our goal is to bring the Unified Development Code itself, the new one, to you as a planning board sometime around probably July, August of next year, with it hoping to go to council in that August, September timeframe and get adopted. So about an 80-week process is what we've laid out. So we will be moving fast, but should be somewhat interesting. Hopefully you won't find reading code too terribly boring over the next year and a half. So that's that project. The other 2 projects we're working on, we have 2 small area plans. We have a downtown master plan update, and we also have a future I-42, NC-42 small area plan. Both of those had requests for qualifications released, and that period is closed for both those plans. We are interviewing consultants for the downtown small area master plan this week, and we will be doing the same in about a week or 2 for the future I-42, NC-42 small area plan. So we do expect both those plans to get kicked off here probably before the end of June, pending approval of budget by the town council. So planning department and you as planning board will become very, very busy over the next few months, and you may not need any training after that point, Member Lipscomb. And then, so I think that's that. We are continuing to see a large amount of growth and development, as you saw tonight. We're continuing to get applications in. I believe we have a number of SUPs in line, and we have at least 1 additional rezoning that you'll see actually next month before you meet as a UDC steering committee. There will be 1 general rezoning that you'll hear next month. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for any member of the board? Okay.
Are you sure we don't need another meeting?
My goal is
tonight. Yeah, I'm thinking, how are we going to squeeze it in?
We'll see. Hopefully we'll be able to keep this on your normal schedule. Obviously, we'll have to see how the small area plans, how they get going, and what our structure is for those. But at this point, I do not expect adding any meetings for the planning board.
What exactly will the kind of powers and responsibilities of the steering committee be?
So that's one thing that our consultant will go over with you next month, but generally you're going to be a sounding board. You'll get, you'll be you'll get first review of a lot of documentation and be able to provide initial input on a lot of things. But you'll learn, our consultant will go over a lot more of that next week or next month.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Being on the downtown, how active is the Downtown Development Association board or downtown board going to be as opposed to us? Is it going to be run through those guys and then we're going to kind of be kept abreast of it, or is it going to be run through us and they're going to be kept abreast?
That we haven't determined quite yet. Where part of that will be developing, we'll figure that out as we begin developing the scope once we select a consultant.
I guess for staff, I guess, are y'all running it with Patrick's help, or is Patrick running it with?
It'll be run out of the planning department, so.
That seems appropriate, not to say anything against Patrick.
Yeah.
That seems appropriate.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right.
Any other comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is informal discussion and public comment. Any informal discussion by any member of the board? Any member of the public would like to speak? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Board Member Bennett.
Second.
Second by Board Member Powers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We adjourn.